welcome to the family, son.
Hello and welcome back to the channel. Before I get back to my regular type of videos, I thought I'd do one more on Alan Wake 2, as IGN's been covering it for the whole of last month, and I'll mainly be focusing on the gameplay that they showed, because although the interviews are really quite fantastic and very interesting, it's not going to be very fun to hear me talking over the top of them. Okay, let's get started with the 11 minutes of gameplay and the hands-on preview, as they're essentially the same thing. We pick up with Saga Anderson arriving at Watery, which is a town not far from Bright Falls that was settled by Finnish immigrants. Saga enters a building called, and excuse the pronunciation, Suomi Hall. And fun bit of trivia, Suomi is the Finnish word for Finnish. We see the janitor from Control, Artie, on stage singing. Redditor Long Requirement 8372 actually translated some of it. The song appears to be called A Nightless Night, and the lyrics go, a bloody mouth twists into a grimace. The cork is lost from the bottle of booze. He can only hear the rattle of the knife's sheath. It's a nightless night, it eats away the light. It's a nightless night, it eats away hope. And of course I can only assume that the bloody mouth twisting into a grimace is Mr. Scratch, and the line about the cork being lost from the bottle of booze is probably something to do with Alan Wake's alcoholism. But of course I'm sure we'll find out more once the game's out, because if you remember from Control, if you've played it, what Artie sings in that game, when translated very clearly, is describing Alan Wake's troubles in the dark place. Another thing that we see in the town is the bus for the Valhalla nursing home, emblazoned with the symbol of Yggdrasil. The driver says that Tor and Odin aren't around because they're both old tricksters, which probably doesn't have any significance outside of just being a nod to Loki. As the gameplay moves on, Saga meets the Koskela brothers, Ilmo and Jaakko. They greet her as if she's an old friend, but she has no memory of this. They even claim that she lived here with her daughter, and it must be painful to come back to where they lived. She says to herself that the story must be messing with people's memories, so at this point she must be aware that Alan's writing can change people's perceptions and perhaps even reality. For now she goes along with it and enters her mind place to profile the brothers. We see that Ilmo is a member of a motorcycle club called the Kalevala Knights, which is very similar to a real-life Finnish-American society called the Knights of Kalevala, who were formed to foster fellowships between Finnish immigrants and to nurture Finnishness, predominantly through the study of the Kalevala, which is a piece of epic poetry from Finland and often referred to as the most influential piece of Finnish literature. After this section in the mine place, Saga asks for the key to her trailer, you know, the one she doesn't remember living in, and Ilmo tells her there's a spare key at Coffee World, but the road's out and so she'll have to take the trail. And it's here where we get a better look at the combat in the game. It's getting darker now as Saga follows the woodland trail, and she encounters what appears to be the splitter type enemy from Alan Wake's American Nightmare. We get a fantastic look at the gore system in this game, which is very reminiscent of the remake of Resident Evil 2. Skin strips away and bones and organs are on show. And in true survival horror style, it seems that headshots are the only way to go if you want to hold onto your ammunition, which I'm sure is going to be in short supply. We also get a look at how Saga is going to solve puzzles in two different manners. The first is on the way to Coffee World, where she finds a lockbox with a numerical padlock. She uses clues in the surrounding area, in this case crossbow bolts in numbered targets, which give her the combination to the padlock, netting her a crossbow, which again seems to be taking inspiration from the padlocks in the Resident Evil 2 remake, which is fantastic because if it's anything like that, we'll get a lot more environmental storytelling. And the second type of puzzle that we see is when Saga actually arrives at Coffee World. She needs to gain access to the gift shop to get the key to her trailer, so she has to scour the area for documents that have clues that in turn she could enter a mine place and put them on the case board, connecting and combining them to give her her next objective, which in this case is finding a screwdriver to break the padlock. And once she's got all the clues in place, she heads over to the percolator, which is kind of like the waltzers, and here we get to see the destructible environments, which looks really good, and I think it will add another really interesting layer to combat, as the combat in this game seems a lot less about fighting waves of Taken and about having to be more deliberate with your shots in order to conserve your limited resources. We also get to see some footage of the crossbow being used. It seems like it's a one-shot kill if you hit the head, and it's got a really good clunky slow reload, which is bound to just ramp up the tension if that's the only weapon you've got ammo for. Okay, so the only other thing of note from this section is that this game has safe rooms, complete with a thermos from the Oh Dear Diner as a save point, with the options to save manually or quick save. And we also learnt from the dual protagonist IGN First interview that these save rooms will be where the player will be able to choose to switch between Saga and Alan. Sam Lakes confirmed that outside of each character's introduction and the end of the game, the order in which you play is going to be entirely at your discretion, which I feel is a really unique approach, but I do worry that if, for instance, I've mainlined Alan's story and then have to go through the entirety of Saga's, that it might end up being uniquely frustrating. But I guess we'll just have to wait. Okay, before I carry on, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. As you can see, less than 90% of you are subscribed, so if you've had any fun with this video whatsoever, please just click that button. I'd love to hear from you, so drop me a comment as well. Right, let's get back to it. And at this point, I was just going to move on to the Alex Casey footage that IGN had. But of course, as soon as I came to record it, everybody and their mother got a hands-on preview. So I guess I'll have to talk about that as well. But we'll start with the Alex Casey footage. We join Alan as he heads towards the Caldera Street station. And I know I'm not the only person that's pointed this out, but a caldera is a type of lake which is formed after a volcanic eruption and a magma chamber empties. And of course, this is what Cauldron Lake is from Alan Wake 1. Alan knows that he needs to use the angel lamp to make the entrance appear, and he sees a very bright light in the distance and goes towards it. There's a neon sign pointing in that direction saying neighborhood illumination, and all around are fly posters for Night Springs and an Alex Casey movie called Cold Casey. He enters this grim looking back alley and we're greeted with graffiti that we've seen from other gameplay. Your fault, save Alice, initiation, return, scratch. But we also see one saying AWE, which is of course a nice little link to Control, and we also see one saying Cult of the Word. Are the Cult of the Word going to be a rival to the Cult of the Tree, or are they perhaps a Dark Place manifestation of them? Either way, Alan carries on, and as he meets an intersecting alleyway, we see Alex Casey. He is clearly dressed as Max Payne from Max Payne 2, and he says, "Is this the way it was on the page?" Alan recognizes him, saying that they met on Dawes' show, and Casey explains that he's looking into a murder, and that there's a piece of evidence in the form of a manuscript page. Alan seems confused, but is also desperate to see the page. Casey goes into an inner monologue, stating that the murder cult is following the story, and questioning if Alan is the leader. And just as Casey approaches Alan with a maniacal look on his face, the light at the end of the alleyway bursts and turns red. Alex Casey goes to investigate, but when he rounds the corner, the lights go out and we hear gunshots. And as Alan catches up, Casey's laying dead, slumped against a wall, with two spectral versions of himself discussing his own murder. And this must be fairly early in the game, because this is where Alan gets his revolver and flashlight, and once the bright light comes back on, he captures it with the angel lamp, much like the Deluminator in Harry Potter, and heads back towards the Caldera Street station. You can also briefly see that the flashlight shows up hidden bits of graffiti, much like the first game, probably leading to ammo caches or secrets, that kind of thing. A big shout out to Hidden Machine for spotting this. If you get a chance, check his channel out, it's really good. And after this, we see a bit of combat with the enemies that Alan will face called fade outs. It seems that not all of them are hostile, and I can't figure out how you distinguish which ones are which. Perhaps it's just a matter of keeping your head on a swivel and watching for attacks. If so, that's going to make the game very intense, and I genuinely hope that I'm right. The last thing of note in this footage is that we see what appears to be a faded out dumpster, much like the darkness possessed objects in the first game, and I'm wondering if we're going to be dodging random everyday objects again. I wasn't the biggest fan of it in the first game, but if it returns, it probably won't bother me too much. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the last bit of footage I've got to discuss, and a lot of people got hands-on with this game, but I'm going to stick to using the footage that IGN used for this next section, just to keep everything uniform. And also, because Saga's section is basically what we've already gone over, I'm just going to briefly touch on the few extra takeaways that we get from this piece. And with that said, let's get started. Firstly, we see a look at the safe puzzle inside the gift shop. The clue is Tracker, Lookout, Cleaner, and I'm guessing this has something to do with the board on the wall that has all the staff members. We also get to see another puzzle which is much like the one for the crossbow box, where there are symbols around the room and these are the clues for a padlock. And then we briefly see what Saga calls the cult's hideout. Nothing of real note is shown here apart from some of their masks and Blair Witch-esque wooden fetishes. We also get to see confirmation that this game has a melee attack, which is going to be great for getting out of sticky situations, and also looks like it's straight out of Dead Space. And the last takeaway I've got from Saga's section of this video is that on her caseboard there's a piece of evidence pinned to it that states, Wake wrote a book in the dark place called Return. Scratch edited it into a horror story. The story's events are slowly coming true. Now this could actually be the events of the game, or it could just be what Saga has concluded from the evidence available to her, but I am hoping for Mr. Scratch to have a large presence across both scenarios, because I think a shared antagonist would probably be more interesting than separate ones. Okay, let's move on to Alan's section now. We pick up with him at the start of a chapter named Room 665. You can immediately see the neon sign for Mirror Peak Bar, and of course Mirror Peak is where the kidnapper wanted to meet him in the first game. Shortly after we hear a phone ringing, and it's clear that this isn't for the first time in the game, but Alan is still unaware of the caller's identity. My money's going to be on Thomas Zane, and hey, it won't be long before we find out if I'm right. After this, Alan's directed towards the Ocean View Hotel. We see him use the angel lamp again to shift reality around himself on a rooftop. And once he makes it inside of the hotel, we see that it has a more high-end Art Deco feel to it against the 60s and 70s style of its counterpart in Control. He examines a poster for a play called The Cult and uses this as inspiration to write the next section of the story in the writer's room, changing the world around himself and progressing the game's story parallel to his in-game manuscript. Okay, I've only got 2 more takeaways from this video, and I'm going to do them out of order. It looks like Alan must use the angel lamp to gain access to the shotgun by shifting reality. And lastly, we see Mr. Door on a TV screen. He's seemingly the presenter of Night Springs, describing Alan's predicament in the dark place. And I think he's going to play a massive role in this game, perhaps even as the person that guides Alan to freedom. But anyway, that's all I've got for this video, so thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe. Please leave me a comment. Tell me your predictions for the game, and I'll see you on the next video.